hope everybody can hear me. I didn't mute myself. I hope not. All right, so let's go. The topic is how to talk about subjectivity. And the agenda is I'm going to talk about reasons to avoid the term consciousness. I don't think it's useful to use the word consciousness. And I'll say more about that. And then we're going to give some definitions. What do we mean by being conscious? And then after that, I'll talk about strategies for speaking clearly, as to say how to reframe confusing languages. And the fundamental thing is, I think using the term consciousness is confusing. So now, when I say don't say consciousness, don't use the word consciousness, I do not mean to say that whatever we mean by consciousness doesn't exist. Like, for instance, Daniel Dennett has a very peculiar notion of consciousness, but I'm not talking about, when I say don't use the term consciousness, whatever we want to mean by that, I'm not saying don't use it because it doesn't exist. I'm saying don't use it because it's confusing. One is, the word consciousness is a noun, and it sort of connotes something fixed, like a shirt or a pen or a cup of coffee or something like that. But that's not what being conscious is. It's more of a process rather than a thing. So using a noun is misleading. And the other reason, which is perhaps even more important, is that the word consciousness is ambiguous. It means too many things. I'll have a slide here pretty soon that talks about all the different meanings of consciousness, of the term consciousness. And if you don't be specific about what meaning you intend to convey, then people talk past each other and don't understand, and think they understand, but they really don't, so forth. So I'm going to recommend that instead of using the term consciousness, say being conscious. Or instead of saying awareness, say being aware, or some variation of that. And the idea is this is just a verbal trick to stimulate our thinking, to be more precise. It's also a practice in the sense that if we do it often, our thinking will become more clear and we will communicate more effectively. So, first thing, there's no such thing as consciousness. The word consciousness is a noun. As I said, it implies something fixed and substantial, but our experience is always changing. We don't have consciousness like we have a shirt or a blouse or a coffee cup. Instead, we are conscious of the shirt or the blouse or the coffee cup or the tree in front of us or the people, of all the things that we're conscious of. But we don't have consciousness. We just are conscious. So that's one thing. The next thing is, and this is really the important part, that the word consciousness means way too many things. I've got this slide up. I don't know if you can read all the little things there. I'll read through some of them. Consciousness basically can mean being awake, not asleep or sedated. So when you wake up in the morning, you're conscious, and when you go to sleep at night, then you're not conscious. It could mean an episode or an occasion of being conscious of something. Or it could mean being conscious of things over a span of time. Or it could mean the general capacity to be conscious of things. Metaphorically, the term can mean a sort of container in which various objects and happenings occur. And I'll get to this in more detail later. Or sometimes, metaphorically, it's the set of objects and happenings that are in the container. So I say, oh, my consciousness was expanded. Well, that sort of means it's sort of like a container. And all the things are in it. Either there's more things or they appear more intensely or something. Metaphorically, again, it can be a sort of lens through which we see or hear or taste or smell or they're conscious of things, like the phrase a bourgeois consciousness or a left-wing consciousness or a heterosexual male consciousness. What that means is there's a sort of lens through which you view the world. It gives you categories that you understand things. Sometimes consciousness means the fact that there are conscious beings in the world. Why is there consciousness? Well, what do you mean? Why is there consciousness? What do you mean is why are there things that are conscious in the world? Why is it that the world contains subjective features as well as objective? Sometimes the word consciousness means a conscious self, like my consciousness left my body, or my consciousness entered the dream state, something like that. What you really mean is that which is conscious. Sometimes it means the sense of being a conscious self, not just being one, but having a sense of being a conscious self. Sometimes it means the ground of all being, like Deepak Chopra and people like him saying, oh, all is consciousness. Everything is consciousness. Well, what does that mean? They're talking about some kind of metaphysical or mystical ground of being. So there's always different meanings to the term consciousness. And if you don't specify which one you mean, then we get confused. Now, we do need to talk about subjectivity, but the issue is, how could we talk about what's essentially private in public language? So without a common language, progress is understanding is hopeless. Somebody says, a consciousness is such and such, and one person thinks they mean a sense of subjectivity, and another person thinks they mean this conscious self, somebody else thinks some other term, and it just goes past each other. And people think they know what they're talking about, but they really don't. So what I propose is a common terminology for talking about being conscious. And since the word consciousness is misleading, I suggest that we don't use it. Instead, we say being conscious or being aware or some variant of that. And we'll get to that in more detail later. But if we need a noun, we could say that, well, when we say consciousness, well, it could be the state of being conscious, or maybe a capacity for being conscious. I mean, in a sense, you could say, even if you're asleep, you could say the sleeping person is a conscious being, which does not mean that they're awake. It means that they have the capacity to be conscious of things. That's just need to be clear on what we're talking about. All right, so now we're going to do a little exercise. I have a picture on the screen. I'm going to unmute everybody. Hope I can figure out how to do that. Where's the participants? Okay, unmute. Okay, now you're mute. Wait a minute. But I wanted to unmute. All right, well, I've got it so you can unmute yourself. So anyway, I'm a little confused about how that works, sorry. So the point is, here's a picture. There are several colors in it. It looks like a picture of a person's head. What color is the neck of this person? Anybody unmute yourself and pipe up. What color is the neck? Yeah, James, go ahead. Just don't wait for me to call. Just pipe up and say.
What's cyan?
Cyan, okay. Which is, if I'm correct, similar to blue. Kind of a bluish. Aqua. Somebody says aqua. Yeah. Anybody else? What color is it?
Bluish.
Blue, bluish, aqua, cyan. Okay. How about the next part of the head just above that? There's sort of like, looks like a hill with a guy sitting on it. What color is that?
Orange.
Orange. Good.
A very weak orange. I'd say a weak orange towards the yellow, just before the orange goes bad. Yeah.
Okay. Weak orange, verging on yellow. Gold. Okay. Orange, yellow, gold. Okay. How many people see red in this image? Nobody, right? There's no red there. Okay. So now, that's the first part of the exercise. Now, I'd like everybody to think of something, a word, a picture, a phrase, a memory, and just think of something, hold it in your mind for a minute. How many people know what they are thinking of? So, and I would venture to say that everybody does, right? You know what you're thinking of. How many people can tell what somebody else is thinking of? How many people, for instance, can tell what James Cook is thinking of? And the answer is, you really can't, right? You really can't do that. Okay, so I'm going to go on to the next one now that we've done that. So this illustrates what I mean by the term subjectivity. I want to say subjectivity is the starting point for all talk of being conscious, mind, and so forth. So when we think of something and nobody else knows what it is, that's subjective. It's directly detectable or observable in principle by only one person. That is to say, the person who is detecting or observing. So I know what I'm thinking of, James Cook knows what he's thinking of, Leonard Huff knows what he's thinking of, everybody knows what they're thinking of, but nobody else knows what they're thinking. It's private, it's hidden, it's interior, it's mental. So thoughts, feelings, particularly shades of colors, that's subjective. Now this may seem elementary, right? But I just want to get this down so that we build on it. So objective is detectable or observable by more than one person. When I said, what color is this? When I said, well, blue, cyan, kind of bluish. What's the other thing? Orangey, orange toward yellow. But nobody said, like something way off the wall like red. Everybody could see it's out there. I have a slightly different point of view on it, but everybody pretty much agrees. That's objective. It's public, it's exposed, it's exterior, it's physical. So the color, shape, behavior of objects, and so forth. That's how I use the term subjective and objective. It's basically private and public, interior, exterior. Now, okay, there we go. I want to use the term experience to mean the subjective aspect of a person's taking into account his or her or their world. By subjective, remember, I mean detectable or observable only by that one person. So the aspect of a person's taking into account their world is the subjective aspect, is experience. Now this is a little circular, unavoidably a little circular. Well, experience is the subjective aspect, and the subjective means detectable, observable, that is to say experienceable, so like it's kind of circular. But we can't help it because our language is basically devoted to the external world. It's oriented to the public world. We can talk about trees and cars and COVID-19 and all the stuff that's out there that everybody can interact with. And so it's hard to speak of what's private, what's subjective. And I want to use the term experience to mean the broadest category, the most inclusive concept pertaining to mind. It includes both the activity of experiencing and what's experienced. There's two poles, and I'll get to that in a minute too. So what do we say when we're to refer to the state that we're in when we are experiencing something? Well, we say we're conscious or that we're aware. That's what it is. Now, the terms conscious and aware are interesting. English has two words that mean roughly the same thing, conscious and aware. Conscious is a Latin root. Aware is an old Saxon root. Some people use them synonymously, others don't. Like somebody will say, oh, well, conscious awareness. Well, if you translate conscious awareness into, say, Spanish, you get consciente, consciente. Because Spanish has only one word for being conscious, consciente. So it doesn't quite translate. German has bewusst, means conscious or aware. Now, some languages have more than one. Portuguese, I hope I'm pronouncing this close to being correctly, but consciente and sciente, French, conscient and au courant, they both mean being conscious, being aware. I don't think they quite map directly to the English words. So I want to use conscious and aware as synonyms. That makes it easy. I want to note that sometimes aware can also mean something like cognizant or knowing. If I say, well, I'm aware of the regulations. I'm aware that the speed limit is 20 kilometers per hour, and I'm aware that I was speeding. That just means you know it. It's not that you're focusing on it. But that's a secondary meaning of the term aware. For our purposes, let's try to use, I would recommend that we use conscious and aware just as synonyms. Okay, so don't say conscious awareness because you're not saying anything new. Okay, here's my special diagram. For those of you who do not have visuals, you can go to my website and find the paper that this is based on, and this little diagram is in there. So the broadest term is experience. Within experience, what we experience is a continuum. And I want to say we're focally conscious of things that are very vivid. If you're looking at your screen right now, maybe you're focusing on my face, or you're focusing on or on the picture. Probably you're focusing on the picture. I don't know if you can see my face, but anyway, that's what you're focusing on. Just focus on the screen, and then without moving your eyes, notice what's off to the left or off to the right. And you can say, oh, well, there's stuff out there. It's kind of a little hard to tell what it is. So that I want to call peripherally. We are peripherally conscious of those things. If we're focused, and there's a focal point and there's a periphery. So the things that are vivid right in front of us, we're focally conscious of them. The things that are peripherally, they're sort of dim. And then some things we're totally unconscious of. But they're just not there in our experience. But with some help, or they potentially could be. So here's an example. Actually, I'm going to go past this diagram because I have more to say about which of these are. So being focally conscious refers specifically to the focal and vivid end of the continuum. When you're focally conscious of something, what you're conscious of is clear, distinct, vivid, intense. It's just right there. I also assert, this is my assertion, and we can talk about this later if you want, that when you're focally conscious of something, you have also an idea or concept of what you're conscious of. And that may be sort of dimly peripheral, but I assert that every instance of being conscious has two elements: the phenomena that you're conscious of and an idea of what you're conscious of. So you know, like for instance, you're looking at a tree where there's colors, there's shapes, there's textures, but it's all put together as a tree, and you recognize it as a tree. And what makes it conscious is that there's a sort of contrast between what's present right in front of you, the phenomenal part, and the idea of it. That's my assertion. We can talk about that if you like. I also think that most of the time, a conscious experience leaves a memory. And if you're conscious, focally conscious, then you'll remember what you were conscious of. Now, I don't want to, this could be taken as part of the definition of being conscious, or it's merely an effect of being conscious. I haven't quite decided where I fall on that question, but that's something to think about. Peripherally conscious refers to the less vivid and acute end of the spectrum. So William James calls it the vague and inarticulate. So we can be aware, dimly aware of peripheral objects, indistinct ideas. All right, here's something. I want you to notice the sensation of your feet on the floor or wherever they are. Just notice the sensation of your feet. Now, you're noticing that, you're focusing on it. Before I mentioned that, before I called that to your attention, those feelings were there, but you just weren't paying attention to them. They were peripherally. You were peripherally conscious of them, okay? So there are emotional and bodily feelings that you're not attending to. How many people have had the experience of what I call highway hypnosis? You're going to some place, you get in your car, you're going to some place that you go every day or very often, and as you drive there, you're like thinking about something else. Oh, what am I going to make for supper? What am I going to deal with this guy at work? What am I going to do with my students? Blah, blah, blah. You're thinking about something else, and somehow you get from point A to point B, even though, you stop at red lights, you don't run into people, and you get there, you make the appropriate turns. Well, but you're not paying attention. But so what I'm saying is, in that instance, you are peripherally conscious of the road and your car and so forth. You may have had the experience of just spacing out. You've got stuff in front of you and your mind is off in la la land. You're peripherally conscious. Sometimes we experience things unconsciously. Objects are so dim that they don't appear at all, but when we become aware of them, we recognize them as subjective. This business I just did with noticing your feet. Once you become aware of your feet, you notice, well, yeah, that's subjective. I seriously doubt anybody else feels my feet the way I do. They can see the outside of them, but they can't feel them from the inside. So, and of course, there's things like psychotherapy and various things like that that enable you to become conscious of things that are private, subjective, but you didn't know about them. You weren't aware of them, You weren't conscious of them, so forth. So that's what it's experience. What I'm saying is there can be unconscious experience. All right, more things about being conscious. Every instance of being conscious, when we're conscious, we are aware of something. In the literature, philosophical literature, this is called intentionality. What I'm really saying is it's a directedness. I'm not just conscious as such. I'm conscious of the computer screen or my coffee cup or whatever I'm conscious of. So intentionality, and this does not mean I intend to go to school tomorrow or whatever. It's the capacity of the mind by which mental states refer to or are about or are of objects and states of affairs other than themselves. So we have a mental state, and within this mental state of being conscious, and in this state of being conscious, we're conscious of stuff. It comes from a Latin phrase meaning to aim a bow and arrow. So we could say that mental states are directed toward their objects, sort of like an arrow is directed toward its target. So we're always conscious of something. Now, directedness has two poles, that which is aimed, the arrow, and that which is aimed at, the target, okay? So this is sort of metaphorically, you can say that which is aimed is like a container, and what's aimed at is sort of like the contents of the container. So William James says, within each personal consciousness, thought is sensibly continuous. Well, within a consciousness, clearly the term consciousness here refers to something like a container in which we find thoughts, and James asserts that our thoughts are continuous. So one flows into another. They're not like discrete little pieces. Or you could say, well, it wasn't in my consciousness, meaning I didn't even pay attention to it. We can talk about expanding your consciousness, which could mean that you become aware of more things. It could mean you're aware of the same things, but they're more intense or vivid. Now, James also says, in another place, he talks about the current content of perceptual experience. Well, obviously, the content. He says consciousness is in constant change. He doesn't mean the container. He means the stuff we're conscious of. These two meanings are often confused, okay? So I just want to keep those in mind. When somebody says consciousness, think, well, are they talking about container? Are they talking about contents? Or do they not actually know what they're talking about? Now, there's this pole, we're conscious of stuff. Well, who is this? Who or what is it that is conscious? What aims? What is aware of whatever it's aware of? We could say it's the self. When asked who experiences, we say I do. Who's watching the computer screen? Well, I am. Now, the nature of the self, that which is conscious, is not a matter of definition. I'm not going to give a definition of it. We need to investigate. Now, there are various names for it: the experiencing subject, the transcendental self or the transcendental ego from Immanuel Kant, the pure ego or the phenomenological ego, Edmund Husserl. Whatever name you want to give it to it, just don't call it consciousness. Don't say, oh, my consciousness is what's conscious of stuff. No, it's like too confusing. If you want to refer to that which experiences, that which is conscious of the world, say the self, the phenomenological ego, the experiencing subject, some other phrase other than the term consciousness. All right. So far, so good, I hope. So what I want to do is suggest strategies for speaking clearly. And the strategy is this. First, substitute the phrase being conscious for consciousness. Just whatever sentence you have, take away the term consciousness and say being conscious, or take awareness and being aware. If the result's clear and unambiguous, then you're done. Otherwise, rework it and make it more precise. So here's a couple of examples. Example, many animals have consciousness. Okay, what does that mean? Well, many animals have being conscious. That's not good English. But we could rework that a little bit and say many animals are conscious. That's good. Okay, many animals are conscious, but what does that mean? There's a lot of them awake at the moment, even though some are asleep. Or does it mean Many animals have the capacity to be conscious, whether or not they're awake at the moment. Probably it's more the latter. So you see how things like many animals have consciousness. You rework it and you get, well, many animals have the capacity to be conscious. Much more precise, in my humble opinion. So here's another example. Our consciousness can be out of body. I went to a workshop one time where there was a lot of talk about being out of the body. And there was always talk about my consciousness left my body and went to Crete and saw the statues there or whatever. So let's rework it. Our being conscious can be out of body. Okay, that's pretty awkward. That doesn't quite work. We can be conscious when we're out of our body. Okay, that's better. And even more precise is we can be conscious of things from a point of view that is out of our body or not in our body. When somebody says, my consciousness, I went out of body, what it means is the point of view from which that person is conscious of things was not in the body anymore. Okay. Somehow I got drawings on my screen. I have no idea how I did that. I apologize. So we're about to go into the questions and discussion part of this. I want to encourage you to go to my website, read some more papers. In particular, go to my blog, bmeacham.com/blogs, the third link there. Because my latest blog post is a case study of how to rework the terms consciousness. I took a very influential paper by Ned Block from 1995 in which he talks about phenomenal consciousness and access consciousness, sometimes referred to as A consciousness and P consciousness. And I sort of went through the paper and said, now, what is he really saying here? And anyway, just go through that, sort of a case study of what I'm talking about. Okay, I'm